Ho, ho, ho. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl. This week, it's our annual year-end roundtable with some writers and beer professionals to toast the end of 2021 and to look forward to the new year. I'm joined by Christopher Shepard of Craft Brew News, freelance writer Carla Lauter, Matt Kirkegaard, the founder and editor of Australian Brew News, and Andy Crouch, the publisher of Beer Edge. What will the year be remembered for? Each is going to share their own thoughts coming up. But first, we're able to bring you this show each week thanks to these advertisers. Athletic Brewing Company's innovative process allows them to brew great tasting craft beer without the alcohol. From IPAs to stouts to golden ales and more, they offer a full selection of beers starting at only 50 calories. Now you can keep your head clear and enjoy the refreshing taste of beer anytime, anywhere. Place an order today at athleticbrewing.com and get free shipping on 2 6-packs or more. New customers can also get 10% off of their entire order with code BeerEdge10. Limit 1 per customer. We're also brought to you by NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers, whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. With a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations, the current day master growers proudly provide 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz or find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at nzhops Ltd to learn more. For the second year in a row, as we end a year amid a pandemic, innovation in the beer space, and uncertainty, I wanted to gather some friends and some fellow writers to talk about the year that was. Since once again, we can't be together in person, I thought this could be a good format to bring together some of my favorite people. They are Christopher Shepard. He is the senior editor of Craft Brew News, which is published by Beer Marketers Insights. Carla Lauter is a freelance writer. Matt Kirkegaard is the founder and editor of Australia Brews News. And Andy Crouch, he's my business partner and the publisher of Beer Edge, as well as the host of the Beer Edge podcast. We had hoped to have Melissa Cole back with us this year, but she was unable to make it. Still, she has a new book out. It's called The Ultimate Book of Craft Beer, and I encourage you to go find it and buy a copy wherever books are sold. So with the assembled, I wanted to talk a little business, have a little fun, and generally see where their heads were as this year comes to a close. So get a beer, get comfortable, and let's have some fun. Shep spoke to me from New York. Carla was in Maine. Andy's in Massachusetts. And the hero of our show, Matt, set an alarm to be up with us in Brisbane at 2 a.m. Here's our conversation. Carla, I want to start with you. When the last day of 2021 comes and goes and we're in a new year, what do you think the previous 365 days in beer are going to be best remembered for?
Oh, that is a great question. I think it's going to be slowing down the alcohol. I think it's going to be the fact that we're going into the session beers and now actually decent tasting non-alcoholic ones. I think this is the year where we turn the corner on that not tasting gross.
What do you specifically point to, like that you had this year that makes you say that?
Well, in addition to probably the most well-known non-alcoholic beer is nationally distributed as Athletic Brewing, and I know that there's been a lot of praise out there for that. But we have now people who are from several main breweries, including Austin Street, that are coming together to make their own craft NA brewery in Maine, the first one ever. And we have 3 other breweries that are also making non-alcoholic beers as part of their lineup in Maine. And the one that's headed by the Austin Street folks is just stellar. It's absolutely fantastic. And I can't wait for that to just kind of be in rotation with everything else. There's just so much going on in the let's pump as many flavors in as possible that people are also, I think we're going to be in that pendulum of taking a break. In my mind, anyway. But there's a lot moving in that category, just in Maine and nationally now. And I think that that's something that's not going to go away. I think there's a big sober curious movement. I think there's a big, take a break for a couple of weeks, a dry week, a dry month, where that's going to be a part of the industry now.
Shep, you follow the numbers. Do those bear out to what Carla's saying?
Heck yeah, they do. Yeah, I was going to jump in if you didn't ask me directly to say that I totally agree. One that comes from a personal place. I am currently drinking a non-alcoholic beer at this very moment, and
which
I
one?
love. So this is the Dogfish Head. The lemon quest. Quest. Yeah. Which I happen to like. I think Boston Beer clearly took their time and came up with a couple of really good options. The Sam Adams, Just the Haze, I hear repeatedly, and I also agree is pretty fantastic option. But there are more and more and more, and there are more coming. I've heard from a couple of brewers in the last 6 months or so, mostly craft brewers, pretty sizable ones that are working on options. And so I think this is just getting started. I totally agree, Carla. I think in the craft space, in the off-premise tracked scan data, non-alcoholic craft is, it's over 1 share of craft dollars. It's getting close to 2 during recent periods, which is a big change from a year ago. A lot of that's athletic, Lagunitas, IPNA. But in the broader beer category, it's happening as well. Heineken 0.0 took over as the top national non-alcoholic beer this year. Bud Zero is coming up. O'Doul's is going away. And
like completely?
Not completely, but it's fading very quickly in comparison to Heineken 0.0 and Bud 0.0. Bud Zero. It's people are just figuring out that it's worth taking a break or a pause, and it's a great way when they taste so good. It's easy to mix in. Right. The way that I explain it, it was actually one of the guys from. Which company was it? One of the non-alc focused brewers told me at a GABF a couple years ago. His line is, "I'm your best third beer," and it's the one that I repeat all the time. It's how I think about it and how I use it. Instead of having that third beer, do I really need that third beer?
Yeah.
And most of the time, I don't. Yeah.
Matt, what's been the non-alcoholic situation in Australia?
It's funny, I've been listening to how comparatively bullish you guys are about it, because we have seen so much mainstream media attention given to non-alc. And to me, it seems like a man bites dog story where the media is focused on it. We have seen some breweries really play into the market. But outside of that third beer scenario where, we are seeing people go to the pub, they don't want to have to explain why they're not drinking or, be seen having the non-beer in their hand, and it's almost masking their reduced alcohol, which is one use case. But there has been so much mainstream media attention for it that the growth doesn't, to me, bear out that there's more than a trial phase going on. It doesn't seem to be a huge uptake. And I probably need to say, in Australia, we've got one of the largest, what we call mid-strength, 3.5% ABV markets in the world. I think 20% of our beer market is around that 3.5%, or 1 standard drink per serve.
Interesting.
And that's why so many of the international mainstream brands trial their mid-strength beers in Australia, because there's a ready-made acceptance for it. And I think that makes it a little bit easier, because we have a lower alcohol culture and have for 30 years. But the thing that I really struggle with fully understanding is, I speak to so many people that when they have their first beer, and sometimes it's sort of when you pour your parents' beer and you sip it and you don't like it. And there's that bitterness aspect that beer has always had that is an acquired taste. And in, late teens, as it is in Australia, when you can drink at 18 or early 20s, it's the alcohol that makes you want to acquire the taste for beer. And I'm trying to work out what is going to be the reason that this sober curious, under 25 age group drives them to develop that taste for beer, given that there's no alcohol, because it's just essentially a drink that they're having, not as a replacement for something, but how will they acquire that initial taste for beer when it's alcohol free? And so, look, it's fascinating. It's early days for alcohol free beer in Australia, but I'm really standing back and asking some questions of the brewers who are making it. And I'm not, other than, people are really excited, people are abstaining, I'm not hearing a lot of that next level thinking about it. Actually, with one exception, there's a brand called Sober, which is spelled Sobah, which is run by
straight out of Boston. Yeah.
Well, this is actually a First Nations brewing company, and it's a young Indigenous fellow and his wife who he wanted to get off the beers. He wanted to get off it. And so he's making what he calls an alternative adult beverage, but using a lot of Australian Indigenous ingredients in it. So whilst it is alcohol free and they're playing in that space, the brand isn't a recognized beer brand. And they also have this whole Indigenous element and then native, like pepperberry and Australian Indigenous fruits and flavors going into it that gives it this whole other dimension beyond the alcohol free. And that's one that, listening to their level of insight into it, I sort of think actually there is something here that's a brand beyond beer.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I'm thinking about the age demographics of the beer drinkers in the US, and that maybe our, drive towards NA is first because we haven't had that kind of 3.5%, that category for, the half strength or whatnot beers is just not there. And second, though, that the people who came in hard and fast, in their 20s with craft beer as it was booming in the US are now my age and, Gen Xers and Zennials, right? So we're getting to the point where we can't drink as much, or shouldn't probably drink as much as we did in the early days of craft, but we're still a big chunk of the craft beer drinking market, demographics wise. So maybe we're a little bit more excited about this trend because it appeals to our lifestyle level, but that is begs a huge question about, okay, so what is going to bring the 21-year-olds into beer, and is it going to be beer traditionally, or is it going to be the hard seltzers and the fruited stuff and the things that taste nothing like beer? So, I think that putting that in perspective is that, our craft beer, revolution is relatively young, and a lot of us got started in it in our 20s-ish, kind of following that, and now we're all aging and going, maybe this will be my best third beer, I like that.
I think that describes me to a T, basically, as Carla was saying. That's what I want. And I've been drinking low ABV. I've been a big lager person for quite some time. And low ABV is a huge part of that. And when I'm looking at a menu, a draft menu when I'm going out, which is not all that often, but it happens from time to time here, I'm always searching for the lowest end of that ABV lineup, because for me, oftentimes I'm driving. Or I'm only planning to have, one or two. I had at some point had a chance to just have one before, I play a ridiculous sport called broomball on the weekends. It's a little bit like hockey. We don't need to get into it. You can just look it up online.
Yeah, we're not going to get into it.
You should do a whole segment, but we won't. But I found myself with only an opportunity to have one. Usually I go out and have a couple with the folks before or after, and I only had a chance for one. So I said, I'm actually unrestricted here for the first time in a very long time. So I had a 7%, main lunch IPA, and I really enjoyed it. It was great. But for me, and that may seem a little wild, I love the idea of the third beer. I love the idea, which for me, frankly, might be a second beer sometimes. This year we had a chance to go to just basically one holiday party, and I was a little bit surprised. It was kind of a corporate environment, but they had an athletic NA offering, and I thought that was awesome. And I indeed used that for my second beer. I think, too much and for too long, NA beer was overlooked, and it was just the sort of thing like, well, you're just lucky we're even making something, for you people who aren't drinking. So we don't care if it tastes, like complete crap. Drink it and just be happy, duels. But instead, we're now getting some of these beer, and some of the early craft style offerings were not great. They had a kind of an off taste to it, or just this under fermented quality. But I think with the right amount of hopping, or as Matt's noting, use of creative ingredients, you're no longer restricted even by the very few limitations that are on actual alcohol based beer. You can kind of brew with anything, and it can kind of taste like anything. And I am willing to let it be about as wild as possible. But frankly, just dry hopping these beers, Athletic did it with one of their beers that I thought was fantastic. It was the Freeway Double Hop IPA. It's a great beer. It's a beer that unless you were really looking for it, wouldn't know that it was NA. And, I'm now trying to keep some NA beer in my house. It goes along with a lot of other beer, but I love the trend. But whether it's just built for me or people like me, it's a great question.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. That's a really good line of questioning on those sort of early drinkers. Especially in Australia where you are. In the US, the entry level drinkers have shifted really hard to spirits in recent years. It's a sort of oft-cited example of a major challenge that beer has. And honestly, one of the major answers, as you hinted to, Carla, is hard seltzer and the quote unquote beyond beer beverages. Hard seltzer, hard tea, hard lemonade, etc., which is, we're only going to be seeing more of in the coming years. I think there are very real questions about how you convince a hard seltzer drinker to enjoy beer. And I think that there are questions that folk, big players in the category are going to need to try to come up with answers to. It seems to me, as a beer lover, but it is, right, the way that they look at it is making a malt-based hard seltzer is a way to, if that entry-level drinker is interested in spirits or interested in a sort of cocktail, vodka soda, gin and tonic, etc., hard seltzer is a way to convince them to sort of move into a brewer's product, since it's mostly brewers who are making them. But again, how you go from there to, even a Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller Light, the classic premium light lagers, let alone craft beers, I think is a challenge.
We've covered a lot of that. No. I'm pleasantly surprised at how deep we've gone on this. And I think we could keep going, but I wanted to get back to that first question. Now that we've been talking about non-alcoholic, Andy, when the year is done, what do you think 2021 will be best remembered for, beer wise?
I think in a word, perseverance. We started, or went into the pandemic with just some really sober-eyed, prognostication about what was to come when we were facing the unknown. We were talking about the possibility of maybe a third or 40% of breweries and restaurants and bars and brew pubs closing. And we have certainly seen an absolutely astronomical number. And, the government needs to do a much better job of assisting those who really took it on the chin for us in the earlier parts of the pandemic by, closing up shop at times when they maybe weren't required to, or really just trying to work through the most difficult and ever changing of regulatory environments, whether or not, and then having to be the mask police as well. I just was in New York this past weekend, and those frontline, workers in the trade are just having to do and things that they were never meant to have to do. And so, brewery owners, people who run tap rooms, bars and restaurants, they have had to pivot again. And they have, all of us have experienced ups and downs, whether you have, kids or a job that makes it particularly difficult. during this time. But if you're in the trade, just not knowing week to week whether you're going to survive and having to do all of this and take care of your staff and keep people safe, but balance that against the need to also be open and provide a decent consumer experience, that's perseverance. These folks, my hat's off to every last one of them, and we are certainly far from the finish line here. But they have done the absolute Lord's work in absolutely terrible circumstances, and that's why, as best I can, you continue to get out there and visit them and tip well and promote them all we can. But really, for me, this is the year of just trying to stabilize and get on our feet, with the possibility that things may improve in the year and years to come.
Matt, has it been a similar situation in Australia?
It has. We've been very segmented. So in Australia, the state borders are a little bit more defined because state governments are willing to exercise their own responsibilities. So, for example, we had a major outbreak in Victoria. And so Victoria was kind of walled off from most of the rest of the country. And Western Australia, which is a bit of a frontier state as it is, has basically kept its borders shut to anybody if there's any COVID going around. And Queensland, where I am, we've been largely open. We've had mask mandates. We've had to check in to venues, but we've been able to function pretty well for most of this year. But there's that constant uncertainty where suddenly you'll have a small outbreak and we'll go into a brief lockdown just to try and control it. So it's been a really tough time for hospitality because it's very hard to do any of that long-term planning, never quite knowing when there's going to be a brief lockdown. But apart from that, it's just a general uncertainty that has been really playing hard on businesses and breweries. But by and large, breweries seem to have done pretty well. If on-premise has not been available to them, people have shifted their purchasing to packaged. So breweries here seem to have gotten through, by and large, pretty well. And it's actually created some challenges for breweries as on-premise opens up again. They've diverted a lot of their production to package, and then suddenly, and that's stuck post-open, but then they're finding they're a little bit in short supply once kegs start rolling out again. And we've actually seen a number of breweries expand on the back of that. So I'm really looking ahead to 2022 and wondering whether there will be a snapback, and breweries that have expanded on the basis of this short-term sugar rush of sales might find that it's a little bit more challenging for them.
Carla, in 2020, your state had at least one brewer, maybe a couple, that were defying mandates and sort of just not necessarily caring about other people. When you look at Maine as a whole for this last year, has it been a story of perseverance? Has it been a story of growth for some and not for others? What's the scene on the ground?
Yeah, I think it's been definitely a combination. In the beginning of all of this, in the 2020, coming into that first summer of the pandemic, I was petrified that we were just going to lose so many breweries because Maine is a very tourist heavy state. So we get way more, visitors to the state in the summer, no matter where you're at. And they really rely on that summer, buoy of people to get into the black every year. Like that's just the nature of being a business in Maine, essentially, especially one like a brewery that has some kind of a tasting room or something like that. So I was terrified really for them that in that summer, that without that revenue or with a significant decrease in that revenue, nobody was going to make it through the next winter. What turned out to happen was that people were very resourceful. They, immediately set up outdoor spaces when they were allowed to. Some of them also, extended that into winter. So we were literally huddling around, fireplaces in the winter to help them scrape by. But what really helped us is that our governor really worked with us to get these paycheck protection loans out, and like prioritized industries like breweries and whatnot, and the service and the restaurant industries to get those out there so that they could have that stopgap. And I think that a lot of that support helped them to make it through that first year so they could plan better for the following year. And this following year, there's been far fewer restrictions in the summer. So we've been able to get a little bit back to that level of business for a lot of folks. And some of them did pivot. Some of them did more canning. Some of them did more things that I think it's, rather than resilience, it's kind of being able to adapt on the fly. If you had some leeway to change what you were doing, or if you had some ability to pivot, you could make it. That being said, we lost after that very first kind of winter, we lost 4 breweries of the 160 something that we had, and 2 of them were for reasons that were completely pandemic not related. One of the founders passed away, and another, they dissolved a partnership because they were not getting along. It had nothing to do with the pandemic. And then 2 of them were generally like, we can't do this. I have seen right now, this time of year, another little spattering of closings. And I think these are the ones that they limped along. And now they're looking at the next winter going, we can't do this. So we're feeling a little bit of that pinch. Nobody that really distributes out of state or that's big that most of these listeners would know, but they're, the local ones, some of the ones that set up in a small town or, kind of came on the scene around 2016, 17, never really got a chance to get their feet underneath them for very long before all this happened. Yeah. So it's better than I expected it to be, but there's still, some losses in there. I think it really did depend on where they were set up before all this happened. Like if they just put tons of money into an expansion or went into a ton of debt before all this happened, you don't have the resources to change yourself or order, tons of gas heaters and picnic tables and figure everything out. Whereas if you had more cash on hand, you had a little bit of more of ability to do that. But I've been in general very impressed with how resourceful they've been, but also how supportive our state has been for them. Yeah. And I would say that the one guy who defied everything, 1 or 2, were definitely the exception. And in fact, the whole beer industry was very angry at them for becoming the national news story when all, 180 of the rest of them were all doing everything right. So it's, and that one particular brewery has completely changed ownerships now. So the offending guy is no longer anywhere near it. So
yeah, as we do get to the end of the year, people start looking at their books and trying to figure out if they can make a go of it for the next year. And this is normally about when you start to hear from folks saying, "Hey, it's been a great run." And this happened even pre-pandemic as well. People don't necessarily want to carry a business over to the new year if they can't. Shep, as you've been, Carla talked about a few that are closing in her state, but have you been hearing about other brewery closings or things sort of on par with what it's been in years past?
We continue to be amazed at how few of those stories come up. At the same time, we have seen so many more stories about openings and expansions. It's in the last couple of weeks in particular. Now, there's always a bit of sort of, you could call it selection bias, where like the media doesn't cover closings as much typically. That can happen a lot quieter as breweries sort of decide to just sort of shut down silently rather than, blast it out to everybody. Rather than expansions or openings, which are typically promoted a little bit more.
Well, you celebrate the good.
Yeah, exactly. But, even the national numbers that were reported this week from the Brewers Association about openings and closings, it's still really the same, which is remarkable. Now, that being said, I do kind of expect some of those same folks that you folks are talking about where, looking at winter, they were able to slog through and get through largely because of the assistance that was offered. But, that got them through some of this year. And if they didn't have a great summer and a solid fall, come end of December, come January, come February, the decisions will need to be made. But what we're seeing a lot of the time with a lot of the openings and expansions that we are seeing are frankly in spaces that used to be breweries, whether it's an existing brewery in the area that is using that as a second location, turning a restaurant that closed into a new tap room, or just a new brewery sort of seeing that space open up and saying, yes, that'll be perfect for us. And so, net, does it end up with a serious reduction in the number of breweries in the country? It's starting to feel like it might not, which is, to Andy's point, is really remarkable and is, frankly, one of the more stunning and fascinating and, in a way, beautiful aspects of the sort of perseverance or resilience of the industry this year, for sure.
That's a nice bow on that.
Really?
No, I mean, I've been surprised along with everybody else. Sorry, go ahead, Andy.
No, I was just saying, well done, Chris.
I mean, and there is, somebody pointed out recently that it wasn't so much about the number of closures, but a lot of folks were laid off early on in the hospitality industry. So breweries stayed open with skeleton staffs or just owners. But there was certainly an economic impact to a lot of folks in and around the beverage space, especially, taproom employees that couldn't, to use the word, pivot to something else inside of a brewery and in other places. So there was loss on certain levels continuing through this year. And then, some hiring back. And I know it's tough for people to justify work in the space these days, but it's it'll be curious to see what happens in the new year. All right, we'll have more in just a minute, but first, thanks to the companies that help keep the mics hot around here. Athletic Brewing Company's innovative process allows them to brew great tasting craft beer without the alcohol. Place an order today at athleticbrewing.com and get free shipping on 2 6-packs or more. New customers can also get 10% off of their entire order with code BeerEdge10. Limit 1 per customer. And NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years to produce some of the world's finest hops. NZ Hops are like no others, unique in their flavors and aromas. Visit nzhops.co.nz to explore more. And now back to my conversation with Carla, Shep, Andy, and Matt. Matt, 2021, how do you think it's going to be remembered beer-wise?
Well, down here, very much good. And Australia is 6 months, behind the Northern Hemisphere seasonally. So that does affect our beer drinking. And it's very much been haze. Anything hazy, anything juicy, but across all alcohol levels, that is very much what's driving it. Whether we're going to see a snapback towards making beer clear again in 22, I don't know, but it's been very much the rise of haze down here.
One of the other things, so a company rooted in your country has seemingly been on a little bit of a buying spree when it comes to U.S. brands. When Little Lion bought Bell's earlier this year, did anybody in Australia really care?
Not really. And it's quite interesting because Lion here is owned by Kirin from Japan. And Lion and our other major brewery, CUB, Carlton United Breweries, basically control 85% of the Australian market between them. It's an incredibly profitable beer market. It's one of the most profitable in the world, as happens when you've got such market concentration. But then also, I think a lot of that, whilst Lion is the engine that's purchasing US breweries, and they bought New Belgium, in 2019? Just before
what year was that, Shep?
Yeah, it was 2019.
Yeah.
I think they're seen as the legitimate craft business but they're essentially buying on behalf of Kirin, which is looking for expansion outside of the Japanese market, and the American market is so big. So, it didn't really ruffle too many feathers down here. Lion also bought our largest independent craft brewery, a brewery called Stone and Wood, back in September this year, and they were the standard bearers for independence down here. They drove it was some of their founders that drove our Craft Brewers Association to become the Independent Brewers Association. They were very much about independence, and they sold out to Lion back in September. So that had much bigger repercussions than anything that Lion was doing overseas.
Shep, when sales like this have happened in the past, there was, from a fan standpoint, I want to talk about that after this, but there's always some sort of hand wringing and some threats of boycotts and things like that. On the business side of things, which I know you're a little bit closer to, how did the Bell's news land earlier this year?
Oh, it was largely cheered. You saw the formation of what will be at the end of this year the third largest producer of U.S. craft beer, or depending on how you want to put it, beer sold as craft in the U.S. Behind AB and Boston Beer. The combination of New Belgium and Bell's is about 1.6 million barrels by the end of this year. New Belgium's been the fastest growing craft brewer in the U.S. For the last 2 years since they did the deal with Lion. It was the clear emergence of a new powerhouse. Having New Belgium as a major player was good. Adding Bell's to that, it was even better. Was sort of how that was viewed in the business world, and really Lion is now seen as, anybody paying attention knew that it was sort of coming, and the appetite that they had, and the moves that Kirin wanted to make in the U.S. and in U.S. craft. Kirin itself remains a very small import brand in the U.S., and they saw craft and acquisition in craft as their way to become a major player here, and that's sort of how that is coming to pass, especially because they are also very clear that they're not done. They want more. They want to build that platform larger. They want to be number two, if not number one. That's how the sort of the business looks at it. It was congrats Larry on being able to do this deal and get out.
Larry and Laura. Yeah.
Yep. And it's, you really see, this larger consolidation of volume among top players, largely funded by, larger brewers who are not necessarily US based. One of the things that I think is interesting about it is, of those top three, AB, Boston Beer, and Kirin Lion in US craft, Kirin's the only one where the majority of their US business is craft now. AB, obviously the majority of its business isn't in craft, but it is, over 2 million barrels of craft at this point with the addition of Craft Brew Alliance. And Boston Beer, most of their volume is Truly and Twisted Tea at this point, the vast majority of their volume. And so the fact that you have this strong number three player that is majority craft, that is mostly focused on craft in the US, is well-funded and does not have the same kind of restrictions on doing big deals to add to that craft volume in the US in the same way that certainly, a player like AB is really interesting. And Boston Beer doesn't necessarily have limitations on its ability to buy regulatory wise or funding wise. It's just not something that they do a lot of or do super duper well. They bought Dogfish Head, but that's not, worked out quite as seamlessly as they initially sort of hoped it would. So yeah, it's an interesting development in terms of how the top end of craft develops.
I also think that it's interesting because we're kind of seeing either through the retirement or sales, the sort of disappearance of that first generation of founders in craft beer. And I actually kind of think that's good for craft beer. I think it's long since time for us to almost stop revering these folks as much as we have done over the years. And it's time for kind of that new generation of drinkers and thinkers. So, while places like New Belgium now are kind of freed from the idea of, well, we have to kind of push this old, stodgy, fat tire beer uphill and try to like make do with what we can. Now they can do whatever ridiculous stuff they're doing, with their Voodoo Ranger brand, which to me looks like a ridiculous thing, but you know what, is selling like gangbusters for them. And hopefully, they won't destroy beers like Two Hearted, but I think, that's a cash cow for them. I trust that they, will treat that brand well, but it frees these, legacy breweries up to kind of be a little bit more responsive to the industry at large and not really chase trends as much or focus on their core brands. But also, we can kind of, as members of the media, stop focusing our energy on the same 10 or 15 people and kind of get out there and explore the stories of the other 9,000.
That's a really interesting point, Andy. We've been talking about a bunch this fall about the emergence of brands. It's something that Steve Fetchheimer, who's been the CEO of New Belgium for the last few years, has spoken about really openly in relation to the growth of the Voodoo Ranger brand, right? Is that they're thinking about brand building in a way that is different, right? Building, Voodoo Ranger as a brand that is only sort of loosely tied to the brewery brand of New Belgium. And that is a pathway forward for craft growth. They really see that. And I would anticipate them, Bell's was already starting to explore that with Two Hearted and sort of building off, creating this sort of brand family around Two Hearted. We're seeing that with Sierra Nevada and the Little Things. And their, 805 for Firestone has been growing and doing well in a very similar way for a number of years at this point. But your point about getting away from some of the founders, it makes I connect it to that point because it's getting away from brewer and toward brand, which is a different thing for craft, or at least the way craft has been for a while now, where you needed that charismatic brewer, literally an individual that was connected to a brewery, that sort of brewery brand was what held it all together. And we're seeing some of the attention and some of the focus move away from that. And I agree with you. I think that makes sense, especially for a new generation of drinkers that might not be as interested.
And frankly, so many of those founders were, white males, like lionizing them, just kind of putting them all up on pedestals, kind of drove that story for the better part of 2 decades. And I'll put that out there that I'm certainly as guilty of this as anyone, because they are the names and they're the ones people are familiar with. And they're the people who will, readers and listeners will click on or listen to, a lot of things that these folks have to say. But, I'm excited to kind of transition into just this new era. And I think it's really interesting, like you said, that brands may be a big part of the future here, that everything used to be so top down. It's like, that is New Belgium and New Belgium is this, and this. Whereas now it's a little bit more freeing for them from that perspective to kind of go in any directions and chase different types of consumers, wherever they may be.
Carla, you're a woman of the people. You're out there. You're talking to folks. You're drinking at the popular bars. Bell's only came into Maine in, I think, 2018.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it really resonated with folks there, but some of these conversations of like larger breweries and, are the more interesting stories for you coming out of the smaller breweries in Maine right now?
I mean, I personally kind of grew weary of writing or talking about the, guy leaves, X job to make brewery, yay, stories, because that was all there was, so from like 2005 onward, it was like, hi, I'm the founder. I did this thing. Look at me. And so I've always tried to find other things to kind of like focus on, but I'm kind of excited about some of the different like models of breweries that are coming about, like, you know, some of the ones that are more, you know, embedded in a community or they have other goals. And like, I think that Andy's right in that we're kind of moving away from that, you know, kind of guy on a pedestal as the brewery's story. I think we're moving into talking a lot more about communities, especially as these little brewers set up in the town that's never had a brewery, you know, that type of thing. I don't think we're ever going to see the kind of like big sized breweries that, you know, came out in the 90s, the Boston Beers, the Magic Hats and whatnot anymore. So it's these smaller, more intricate stories that are kind of what's driving things. But also we've seen the exact same thing in Maine where we had David Geary, you know, one of the founding folks, you know, pass the torch to somebody who bought his brewery. You know, we've got, you know, people who are, you know, we got new people working at Shipyard. We've got, you know, it's just it is a transition, but it's also, I'm not sure, going back to the age thing again, like we know and care about these stories of these veterans, right? But like the new generation doesn't. Like they don't have this history with Bells. They don't have this history with, you know, Sam Adams in the same way that we do.
Yeah. So
I'm wondering if we're, you know, seeing all of this and, you know, doing all this introspection on it, but like, do they really even care? Like, I don't know.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask Matt, because when you were talking about Stone and Wood as a brewery that was leading this charge for independence, obviously you're covering the industry and there's going to be people who have opinions about it, but the general consumer that's showing up at the bar, walking into a package store, do they care?
That's where this is so fascinating to hear, you know, just that little bit of conversation is the craft beer movement was cast in terms of a revolution. And, you know, for the revolution to be meaningful, you've got to remember the tyranny that the revolution was against. And the new generation of brewery founders, the new generation of consumers are entering a market that they don't remember, where it was just the dominance of one beer style, and they are completely spoiled for choice. And that was the idea of founder versus brand is actually fascinating, because there is a risk that the more here, and I can't speak more generally than here, the more that we try and keep the narrative around, you know, what is craft beer, what is, you know, good beer versus bad beer, what's independence versus others, you're talking to a little walled garden of aging beer drinkers and not to the next generation coming on, for whom, you know, a seltzer in Australia, RTD, the ready-to-drink spirits market, it's all blurring. Once upon a time, beer was a very, very distinct category, as we've seen fruited sours and, you know, the very juicy hazies that are very similar to a seltzer in one way, or you can manipulate a ready-to-drink spirit with a lot of additives, that I don't think that they really are as enmeshed in this idea of craft beer as being a separate category. And that's a huge thing over the next couple of years of how you mark out your business. And I think brand, not founder, is a way to do that. And then you also have the challenge of growth, where you're the small local craft brew pub that was leading the revolution against what went before. That is very, very limiting, because you almost have to have that personal relationship with the founder or the venue to have it. But brand can transcend that personal relationship with a brand. And I think that's where we are going to see brands really come to dominate, because a brand can mean so much more to so many more people.
Anybody want to jump in on that?
I know it's rough.
You feel old, guys.
Yeah, it's rough for it's rough for John to have to like ask questions. So
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's you've hit it there. That, you know, the next couple of years are going to be really interesting to see what happens to craft as a separate entity. Is it still going to be a separate entity? But yeah, I do feel old. Because I'm like, I've been writing about beer since 2007. So, you know, it's, you know, evolved with me. But it's kind of hard to put myself in the shoes of somebody 21. It's interesting.
But that's the exciting thing. Like I'm kind of pumped about what's going to happen in this next generation, because we have sort of these groups of stodgy old beer writers, myself included, not anybody else on this call, of course. But just seeing breweries kind of like tiptoe into TikTok and to allow their social media to be run by sort of younger voices. Like I'm here in Boston, I'm watching Night Shift kind of start to go in this route. And Night Shift's always been great at self-promotion and branding and marketing, making solid beers. And now they're kind of doing these things on TikTok that you could see them expanding out to a different audience as well. And they're kind of this in-between stage where I think the founders are probably very early 30s at this point, started the brand when they were in their early 20s. So I think they're probably feeling a little bit of a disconnect as well, because the folks running the TikTok are not individuals you've seen associated with the brand before, and they're making them present in those videos. So I'm excited to see where things go. And I'm also excited just to kind of see the future of beer writing and beer communication.
Well, Andy's snark aside, I will ask another question. And Shep, you know what's coming because I've asked everybody else the same question, but we've covered non-alcoholic and business and perseverance and all that stuff aside. When the book is closed on 2021, what do you think it'll be remembered for beer-wise?
All that stuff aside?
Yeah. Because we've talked about it.
I know, exactly. Well, I did know this was coming, and I have been thinking about it, and
we didn't even rehearse.
Yeah. I know. I'm just picking up the cues here. And I am having trouble coming up with a different answer. The year in review article that I wrote for our flagship newsletter a week or so ago did center on the notion of resilience and folks in the industry just figuring out how to do what they had to do. But underlying that, an aspect of the article that was less, that was a little bit under the surface, you had to sort of read through the lines to pick up, was a little bit of a lack of beer. There wasn't a lot of beer. The first major topic was hard seltzer, because of how important that was and how important that category and its ups and downs have been to the broader U.S. beer industry. And of course, this was focused on total U.S. beer and not craft. I think in craft there are some other threads to pick up, but I think one of the ways that I think about how beer might be remembered in 2021, when we're zooming all the way out and looking at the whole category, was how little of it there was, and that beer, when we're talking about the U.S. beer industry, did not receive a lot of weight. I think if you sort of totaled up all of the words published by my publisher over the course of the year, it would be a remarkable decrease in the share of words written about beer as compared to other things, whether that is hard seltzer or other beyond beer products, or competitive products like spirits, and especially RTD cocktails. If I want to zero in on craft, I think the word, another R word, another RE word, reckoning, comes to mind. And I think that I can apply that to a lot of things, including the what we were just talking about, sort of what are we? Does this thing that we've been rallying around for so long continue to resonate? I think there are a lot of folks in the segment that are asking those questions of themselves, but can't ignore, the way that the industry has been reckoning with just patterns of harm, patterns of sexual harm, patterns of sexual discrimination, racial discrimination, and lots of other patterns that have centered attention on the few, and not opened up the industry to the many. And that is also encouraging to me. Obviously it was a headline grabber and a social media focal point through the middle part of the year. That has faded somewhat. But as I said to somebody, just last night, I think a lot more of the more important and more interesting work is happening now underneath the surface, even if some of the public conversation has turned elsewhere. And that's encouraging to me. And I would also say that some of that work is not just happening in craft. There are folks way, way, way high up in the beer industry that are thinking about ways that beer can be more inclusive and equitable and just for more than just the people who are leading it. And I think that that's a good thing.
Accountability, I think, is the word that resonates with me for the better part of this year.
Yeah.
After the Instagram story started, after people started sharing experiences, there were owners, brewers, people in the beer industry who were held accountable for previous actions and sort of set in motion, hopefully better practices going forward and better accountability going forward. Carla, your state had a couple of folks called out, and your region as well. Do you think what happened, with this reckoning, with these stories, do you think there's forward movement right now?
I do. I mean, in Maine, it was a little weird because the couple that got called out were already not working at these breweries. So like it had already been somehow quietly internally handled for some of these situations. And I do think that this, I'm going to sound mean when I say this, despite us as women saying this for the last 15 years, the fact that now people are kind of understanding that, yeah, this stuff is actually happening in a negative light to people, or has happened to them in the past. And now that there's actually some level of acknowledgement that that's real, and it's not something that is, just kind of rare or, just a one-off, or maybe there were certain circumstances or all of that, is powerful. And I hope that acknowledgement that this is actually a thing leads to continued accountability and more ways to prevent these type of situations in the future. The thing that I'm a little worried about is that there were some instances in which, okay, you called out the baddie leaves the company, right? But like, I would love to talk more about, like, broadly, how do you make events where everybody's intoxicated more safe? What can you do to to change a tasting room environment to make it, make these situations less likely? What can you do to address if you have an employee you think might be a problem before it becomes a social media call out, accountability type situation? And I don't feel like as an industry, we've really had those conversations yet. Like, I would rather talk about like what you can do to make a beer festival or a beer event a more accessible, inclusive, safe, and positive experience for everybody who might want to come to it. And I think that maybe we'll get there, but this past year was very much like you said, a reckoning, that maybe these problems are actually there for real. And that maybe we can in 2022 kind of look forward a little bit more about like, how are we going to, as an industry or just organizers of events or designers of breweries and tasting rooms, really figure out ways to put this into practice other than just removing somebody, when they're a problem.
Man, I know Australia looks to the US and other places for, what's on the horizon and what's coming up. When all of these conversations were happening and people were, coming to terms with stuff or trying to make meaningful changes, were the similar conversations happening in Australia?
Very, very much. It's one of those hard ones, being a 50-year-old white man, to sort of stand back and say that it wasn't an issue here isn't right. I wasn't directly affected by it, but standing back and watching it, it really raised awareness of the need to have these conversations and to be very aware that the industry is progressing and, focusing on all of the inclusivity. There didn't seem to be the same level of problematic behavior surface, and I'm not sure whether that's because it wasn't happening or it wasn't talked about or what it was, but there was certainly a lot of awareness of the need to have these conversations.
So, Carla, as you've been, and I'm not asking you to speak as a woman, solely on this, but have you, when you said that, for 15 years now, these are conversations that you've been having, have you seen that more people have joined the conversation? Matt is a 50-year-old white guy, me in my 40s, like are not only beer people, but other folks outside of the industry, are they joining the conversation in a meaningful way? I
think they're trying to.
Okay.
And I would rather have them try than not try. So like, there's a lot of fear out there that like, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I would rather have everybody, who could help, try to help, whether that's, in a, awkward way or not, or whatever. I am encouraged that that there are other people in the industry that are bringing this up and not just relying on the women to do it who are in the industry. Because that's the other thing that gets exhausting, is that if you're the only one, raising the alarm all the time, then people go, well, it's just you, or it's your problem, or whatever. And it just feels hard, it's hard when nobody else takes up the reins to also say, no, look, this is not good. And I definitely think that several years back, Me Too helped lay the foundation for women to say, look, this is actually happening. Listen up. And now we're at a couple of years later where we're like, okay, now we're all going to agree that we're going to try to fix this. And people are trying to contribute more and just stop relying on the victims to do all the advocating. And I really do appreciate that we're moving away from basically relying on the victims to relive their trauma every time we want something done. So that's a hard thing to do, like watching the, US Olympic team, trial where they keep having to testify over and over and over again about these horrible things that happened to them. It's like, can't other people testify about how bad this reaction was instead? It's just, I do, though, I have to say, I have been seeing more voices joining into confronting these things and proactively calling each other out. And I've been waiting for that for quite some time. Even just that simple, not cool, kind of between, peers, like, hey, don't do that. Hey, not cool, bro. Like that is just immeasurably valuable, because it means that, I don't have to be the one to point out that you're hurting me, but somebody else can go, oh, that's not, what are you doing? Stop that. So it's, I think there's a lot more acknowledgement of that. And I do think that the public reckoning that happened contributed to more people being willing to, raise their voices on this, because they may not have been aware that it was going on to that degree. And now they're looking for it.
Yeah. And this doesn't end with 2021. The work continues, obviously.
No, right.
Yeah. Well beyond even next year and beyond. As I've been asking folks on the show for the last I don't even know how long now, but as we start to end our time together on the show, I've been asking folks or saying that April and I were watching The Good Place for a while during the middle of the year, and there's a whole aspect of the show where you can walk through a green door and be any place, anytime, anywhere, with anybody that you want. And so if green door technology existed on this plane of existence, and this conversation comes to an end, and you could walk through it into any bar, anywhere, with anybody that you wanted, Chris Shepard, where would that door lead you?
Oh, shoot.
You got to go last on the
I know, yeah. I get it.
So now everybody's doing the reverse math in their head.
Fair is fair. You were very specific about saying which bar.
Well, it could be a brewery. It could be a drinking establishment. How's that? As you try to buy more time by asking me to elaborate on my question.
All good. I would. This just bubbled up into my brain, and I don't know why, but there's, I think, maybe because I was talking about it with some friends a week ago, I would walk into a pub in Galway that's right on Quay Street, right down. It's one of the big pubs, and the name of it I don't remember, although people who have been to Galway are probably familiar with it, but it's a big bustling pub, and there's a corner in the back where a lot of people have written notes and written limericks in particular, and in their various inebriated states, and tucked them into corners. And I did this once with my family, and I think that if I could walk through a green door and be anywhere, I would be there. With my family, including cousins and my grandmother and my best friends who don't live nearby and who live in the city and who live in North Carolina and live in Colorado, who I have not been able to spend very much time with over the last few years. I would be there with them drinking pints. And it would feel a whole lot like the time that I was there in like 2013, writing a limerick and tucking it into a drawer.
That's sweet. Andy Crouch.
Yes, sir.
You could walk through the green door when this ends. Where are you going? What are you drinking? Who are you drinking with?
My mind has been focused in recent months on the absence of travel and the inability to go to so many places. And while the city of Bamberg in Germany is never far from my mind and is never far from the mind of anyone.
Way to pander to the audience.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pivot and go a different direction, which is I just want to go home. I want to go back to Chicago where I grew up, and I'd probably go to, while Hopleaf and Dovetail would be on the list of places I would go. I just go to a little bar kind of near where my family, lived in Chicago, called the Village Tap. And it's just a simple neighborhood bar. It's a place that I would often just stop in for one or two on my own. And Chicago is a great city in which to just even drink on your own, just to be there by yourself. And you can talk to, you can bring a book or a newspaper, or you'll talk across the bar to people you have never met before. And there's something, wonderful about that. And I would just love to be there even about this time of year. A little snow on the ground, would be helpful. But I think it's been about 3 or 4 years since I've been home, and I would love to go and see family and friends and just, reconnect with the city that I grew up in, and around. And that would be, it may be somewhat simple, but that's really what I think my heart is set on.
Matt, where's the green door taking you?
Well, because it's a green door, clearly there are no carbon emissions, so it's guilt-free travel. Because I'm a big believer in we should travel, not beer, because beer is very representative of the place and the culture that you consume it in, whereas wine tends to be about the place that the grapes are grown. So travel is such an important part of beer drinking for me. And I think I would walk through the green door to the English Garden in Munich and just have, a lovely Munich Hells on a late September afternoon in the sun, just enjoying beer the way that it really should be enjoyed with good friends.
Carla, final word on you.
All of yours are so heartwarming. So what immediately came to mind for me, and this might just be because we were talking about kind of the evolution of the beer industry, is that I would love to go back to whatever hotel ballroom I was in 2010 for the first ever beer writers conference, where everyone that I had ever met on, the internet was all in one room talking, drinking Dogfish Head Worldwide Stout, getting way too drunk because we didn't know any better, and just sharing stories about wherever we were from. And if this was really the green door, I'd love to go back and try to get their predictions about what beer is going to be like in 2021. And just to see, kind of where we thought the trajectory of the beer industry was going and what it turned into. And then spoiler them on, hard seltzers and not your father's root beer. So, I think there's something to be said. Also, we touched on too a little bit about the beer community and being all apart, we love these third spaces where we all get together physically, but it's been a long time for a lot of us to be together physically. And I miss some of my people that I used to see every year at certain beer events, right? Like those types of connections, for now, almost going on 2 years, we really haven't had. And it's just, I just miss that kind of excited meeting up with everybody and seeing what's new in their lives.
John, you have asked this question many times to many people in recent months. And I think I'd like to turn it around for you. The green door is presented to you. Where are you going when you pass through the other side?
I think I have answered this, at least on somebody else's show who stole my brilliant question and turned it around on me. But my answer has been a few times now of going to Motor Lambic, having a steady stream of Terrace Bulba and hanging out with my dad, which is one of my fondest drinking memories, that if I can, if I could recreate it and build upon it, I think I'd be very happy. With that, I will say thank you so much, Carla and Chris Shepard and Matt and Andy for doing this. We miss Melissa Cole and hope to have her back next year. But really, thanks for doing this. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your thoughts and a little bit of your time so close to what's one of the busiest times of the year. So hope to see you all in person for real beers in real life real soon.
Yeah.
And happy New Year to you, John.
Yeah. Thanks.
Happy New Year.
Thanks,
everybody.
John.
What do you think 2021 is going to be remembered for? You can email me. It's John Holl, JOHNHOLL @beeredge.com, or you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter @John_Holl. And a reminder that you can check out The Beer Edge on all of the social media channels @The Beer Edge. Also, join the smoked beer conversation with other enthusiasts on the This Week in Rauch Beer Facebook page, or we're on Instagram and Twitter @TWRauchBeer. Thanks as always to the folks who help keep the mics hot around here, including Athletic Brewing Company. Their innovative process allows them to brew great tasting craft beer without the alcohol. From IPAs to stouts to golden ales and more, they offer a full selection of beers starting at only 50 calories. Now you can keep your head clear and enjoy the refreshing taste of beer anytime, anywhere. Place an order today at athleticbrewing.com and get free shipping on 2 6-packs or more. New customers can also get 10% off of their entire order with code BeerEdge10, limit 1 per customer. And we're also brought to you by NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. With a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations, the current day master growers proudly provide 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz or find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn @NZHops Ltd to learn more. A reminder, go check out the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast drops on the 15th of every month. Nate Weber, he does our theme music. Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and I'm John Holl. New episodes of this show released every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer. Merry Christmas.